Hello guys, it is of course me, Trollface the Man, and welcome back to another Patreon early release video. This is of course a series of videos I release 5 days early to my Patreons versus their public release. So today I'm going to be modding a PSU from a PlayStation 3 in order to be a 12 volt power supply. These are quite actually impressive. If you look on here, this is one from the old FAT32 model. It has a 120 volt, or excuse me, yeah, well it says 100 actually, 100 volt through 240 volt input, and a 12 volt 32 amp or 5 volt 3 amp output for the different rails, which 12 volts times 32 amps is 384 watts. So this is like a 350 watt 12 volt power supply. Basically, it's winter in Michigan. Oh, excuse me. No, it's not winter in Michigan. It feels like it's winter in Michigan. It's October in Michigan. And instead of having like early October weather like we should be, we're having like late October, almost winter weather around here. When it should be, you know, maybe 50 degrees at night, like on a bad night, it's getting down to being like 40, like below 40 right now. And I'm trying to grow a lot of plants. I'm trying to grow basil, catnip, catmint, lemon balm, aloe vera, stevia, ginger, tomato. I mean, I'm growing all these different things. And this cold weather is killing my plants, especially the stevia and the ginger, which are considered more tropical plants. They are not liking the cold weather. So I need to move them inside the house. The problem is that I don't actually have any dedicated indoor grow area, so I'm going to make one. Simple enough. I buy some grow lights from online, LED grow lights, very low power, 12 volt, 10 watts, and I put them on some type of chunk of metal and use it as a heat sink and draw away the extra heat and etc. Except it's not that simple because, of course, I am going to need a power supply. Now, if I look online, a 100 watt power supply, so if I'm using 10 lights that are 10 watts, a 100 watt power supply, I wouldn't want to use that in the first place. I'd want to give myself at least 50% leeway, so 150 watt. So 150 watts, a 200 watt power supply online from eBay cost about $30. And that's pretty expensive for me just to get it like, you know, for some grow setup. But regardless, it's going to be from China. And if I'm going to have a power supply that's going to be potentially running by itself with no one around, I am not going to trust some possibly extremely janky and dangerous power supply from China to be running at my house with nobody around, because I do not want my house to burn down at some point. I had this old power supply for the PS3 here that just so happens to be perfect because it has a 12 volt and 384 watt output on these back rails right here. But it's a little bit unique because you have to do a specific modification in order to get it to output said voltage and amperage. Basically, I had a PS3, one of the old ones, the original ones, back in like 2006 or whatever. I bought it. Worked great for a while. I eventually got a newer PS3, the slim model, and this one sat around forever. And one day I finally decide I'm going to try and get this PS3, give it to somebody else, and let them use it and enjoy it. Well, the day that I tried using it, it was horrible. Like everything was freezing, glitching, like really bad quality, you know, like just not a very good play value because, well, as I took the thing apart and I looked at the thermal paste for the CPU and the GPU, it had completely dried up. I mean, just completely dried up. There was like no thermal paste. It shriveled into nothing. So I replaced the thermal paste, put the whole PS3 back together, and it didn't work. So I took it apart, checked everything, put it back together again, and it still didn't work. I don't know what happened when I took it apart, but something happened. So I do the, of course, stupid thing of, it's late, I'll put it off to the side, and I will finish it some other time, maybe tomorrow. Put it off to the side, the whole PS3 in a bunch of pieces, and never go back to it. Weeks go by, eventually months, and I finally look at the PS3 and I go, maybe I should do something with it. Of course, by this point though, the parts are all missing, screws, nuts, everything is just out of place, nothing. It was impossible for me to put back together even if I wanted to. So it's just sat as like a big bundle of parts in a spare room for a long time now. So I thought, what better way to do this, or to do something with it, than actually convert it over to this 12-volt power supply to use for my my grow lights for my spare room plant growing setup. So, with all that out of the way, let's actually get to this. So I've taken off about 5 screws that are just located at various points around the side. If you don't know what you're doing, I do not suggest doing this because, well, there is a major shock hazard. Because as you can see, there are some fairly beefy capacitors in here. 100 microfarad, 420 volts DC. That'd be a nice, good shock if you were to by chance hit that. It's a pretty nice power supply, and like I said, I trust this power supply, especially how much leeway I have with 384 watts when I only need about 100. A lot more than I trust a 100 or 200 watt power supply from eBay that will be from China, and like I said, potentially burn down my house if I leave it running for too long. So I take this 100 times over. Basically, the modification for this is extremely simple. You have the live and neutral, or the neutral and live plugs right here. It actually has this as part of the back of the PS3. You can just plug it in and use your standard, what is it? I don't even know what that would be considered. It's like a computer plug. I don't know actually specifically what it's called, which I really should because I work on computers. But you have your grounding wire, you attach that. The issue is though, is if I actually plug this in, let me do that real quick. I'm actually going to put back on the screws on the side too, so this cover isn't flopping around. I'll be back in 1 second. Alright, so the issue is I have all the screws back in and I plugged this into a power supply, so it is currently live. The issue is if I flip this around and I prod its holes, ooh, sounds very provocative. Nothing. Nada zip zelch. And that is because, apparently, these power supplies, like many, I've modified computer power supplies like this before, and what almost always occurs is there is a detection method, in which case the power supply is designed to detect that it's plugged into a motherboard to work properly. If it does not have that detection, because it's not plugged in, then it simply will do nada zip zelch. Because, well, for safety, I'm sure. The good news is that the fix for this is extremely simple. So I'm not actually sure what order it goes, if it's from left to right, but I was able to find the pinouts, or the specific uses for this wire right here, which is the one that's supposed to plug into the motherboard, online. The first one is supposed to be the power switch detector, which needs at least 3.3 volts, or I assume probably 3.3 volts, to work properly and actually allow the power supply to kick on. The second and third one are the grounds, and the fourth and fifth ones are plus 5 volts. Well, the ideal thing would be for me to have one of these plus 5 volts connect directly to the 3.3 and put out exactly 3.3 volts. But I think from other videos I've seen online, one of which was by Great Scott, which he does a modification like this and he does a brilliant job on it. He actually does a proper voltage divider and everything. But regardless, I think that if I cut these right here and I just attach one of the 5 volts to the power detector, even though if it's higher than the 3.3 volts, I think it will still work for tricking this power supply into thinking that it's plugged in. So that's actually exactly what I'm going to do. So if I show you right here, I'm going to take these wires, I'm gonna snip them. Alright, so I actually ended up testing it with my multimeter, and I found out the proper order is, if you're facing it like this, is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So these two are the plus 5 volts. These two are ground, and this one is the 3.3 detection right here. So actually, instead of just combining these together, or one of them together, I'm going to combine these two together by soldering them, combine the two ground together by soldering them, and then bridge a wire between these two and leave these ones open, because this also apparently on those rails puts out 5 volts, 3 amps. So if I ever need a 15 watt 5 volt power supply, I can just use these two sets of wires. In theory, let's see if this actually even works still. So I'm just going to twist these two 5 volts together, because presumably the 3 amps will be a combination of the two 5 volt wires, not one of them. So there's probably, theoretically, unless these are bridged somewhere else, there's theoretically 1.5 amps per 5 volt wire. So by combining together, we get the full 3 amps. And these are just the grounds. I don't know if they're separate. More than likely they're just bridged together. But just to be sure, I am soldering those together too. And these could just be twisted together. I'm using solder because it's more of a permanent fixture. So let me just actually wet my gun there. All right, there we go. These are soldered together. And I'm just going to give this one a little bit of a tinning here. And jump, let me see. I can do a permanent one afterwards, but I am just going to jump these together with this wire for right now and see if it actually works. Oop. If it would actually bite onto it. Okay, so it is on there. Now if we take this, I've just been shoving the ground right in here for right now until I can actually get a screw to mount it again, because I have no idea where that original screw went. Now if I take this power, plug it in here, switch it on, what we should hopefully get is 12 volts coming through these two. I heard banana clips work very well, those two outputs there. Heard banana clips fit perfectly in there. Oh yeah. Look at that. 12.06. And once again, this isn't some low quality crap power supply that you're going to be getting off of eBay from China. This is Sony company, Entertainment Incorporated, very high, quality. I mean, it wasn't a PS3. And when these things first came out, the PS3s were like $600, and they were pretty amazing machines for the time. And then, like I said, if I touch this right here and this right here, we can see that I also have a secondary 5 volts, 3 amp power supply off of these two wires here too. So that is perfect. The only other thing that I could think of to do with this is, it's not probably necessary in my case, seeing as I'm only going to be using 100 watts out of the almost 400 watts this power supply is able to put out, in theory. But another thing I could do is, if I was going to be using closer like 300 watts or 400 watts, is I would take a fan, like a 12 volt computer fan, probably drill some extra holes, take this cover off first, drill some extra holes in here, glue it or screw it down, and just hook up the 12-volt fan directly into the 12-volt power supply and have that running, blowing air or sucking air through there to keep it cool. But because I am doing the only 100 watts, and also the more important thing is that I don't actually have a spare fan like that. I did have one, and I was going to do that for this video, but I dropped it and the fin snapped. So the fan was useless. But if I did have one, I would have done it for right now. Just go ahead and put it right on there. Now, other thing I'm wondering is, because we are just basically shorting these two out, I wonder if I should just add a resistor there to act as a resistive dropper. So if I just bridge this right here with a resistor to get it down to maybe like 3.3 volts, and then I don't know how much current is actually going between these 5 volts and this 3.3 detector. So I'm going to try and grab a resistor right there and see if I can just put a resistor across there to act as a dropper. Alright, so I have a 680,000 ohm resistor here, and if I touch it across here, we can see that it brings the voltage to about 3.5. Still not exactly 3.3, and sure, I could play around with the resistances until I got exactly 3.3, but I think this is good enough. Like I said, all I wanted to do is to limit any current that might be flowing between these two wires and bring the voltage down to its specifications, or at least close to the specifications. The only question is now is if I solder this across here, will it still work? Also, you might have noticed that I clipped the two ground wires. I had a little instance where the 5 volt ended up touching the ground wire and apparently drew too much wattage or amperage, and the unit just stopped working, and I thought I had fried it. And I unplugged it and let it sit for about 10-15 minutes, and it seemed to have reset itself. But I seriously was worried that I had completely effed up this power supply, which would have really sucked. But I'm going to solder these two across and see if it actually still works, putting out the 12 volts like it should. While I'm showing you this, I actually want to show you something I learned from watching Big Clive's YouTube channel, which is actually extremely useful. If you ever have a problem when you're trying to solder something and it doesn't just kind of lay down and bubble properly, it kind of gets like these sharp, jagged edges, take some extra flux. I actually have some electronic flux over there, and just simply apply it to the joint. Just a little extra touch of flux, and when you solder it now, it'll form a nice, neat joint without any of the sort of peaks and stuff you were seeing just before. So this should lower it down to about 3.8 volts, I do believe. Let's see if it still works. So yeah, as I feared, apparently the resistor doesn't allow enough current to pass through to actually allow it to trigger the power supply. So you can see this by if I simply just jump around it, that the power supply now comes on. So I guess it's onto a voltage divider then. Alright, with a little bit of trial and error, I am happy to say that I have created a voltage divider that is just about perfect for this specific power supply. So I plug this in, turn it on, and you can see I have the schematic right here. So between the 5 volts and the sensor, a 3.3 sensor, I have a 4.7K resistor, and from the sensor to the ground I have a 20K resistor. Now if I end up turning this over to my voltage setting and I touch right here on the sensor and I touch the ground, which I guess I can just touch right here, you can see that it is now you can see that it is 3.25 volts, which is good enough for me, and it apparently is good enough to work because if you can hear, you can hear click on and off when I am flipping the switch on and off. And this should both limit the amount of current going through there and actually supply a amount of voltage that is proper for this specific power supply sensor. Now if I stick this in here, if I prod these holes, we are getting 12 volts. This is perfect, exactly what I need. And now, I guess the only thing left to do is to use this to actually construct my lights. I think that it will work most wonderfully because once again, 384 watts, I'm only going to be using about 100. It is made by Sony and it is high quality, not some cheap Chinese power supply that more than likely is going to, I don't know, explode when you go to use it. So I am happy with this. Actually, you know what, I do have perfect. I have a UV LED light right here that is 12 volts. And why not test it out, right? So I am not sure entirely which side is positive and which side is negative. And I probably should have a resistor here, but not that way. Yeah, so I don't actually have any proper clips to put in here for right now, but I just shoved a piece of metal in there because what the hey. Let's see. Ah, yes, beautiful. That's actually because the wire is wiggling around, not because of the power supply. So this is a 12 volt, 10 watt UV LED, and it is kicking off wonderfully. And this is not even using 1/40th of the capacity of this power supply. And I plan to get 10 of not LED, or excuse me, not UV, but grow lights on a bar above my plants to grow them during the winter, because once again, the winter is killing a lot of my plants and I'm not very happy about that. The very premature winter-like weather, should I say specifically. Anyways, guys, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you to my Patreons who have supported me thus far, and I hope you guys like the new credit system where I'm actually giving Patreons their own credit screen at the end of videos. I hope you guys enjoy that, and I ask that if you do enjoy this video, please hit the like button, please subscribe if you haven't already, and please consider supporting this channel if you are not already, and thank you for everyone that already is. I hope you guys enjoy this, found it useful. Like I said, I probably will do some modifications, maybe do a quick update video when I have everything set up, like the actual lights and everything, and yeah, thank you guys very much for watching, and bye!